how's it going? Oh, wait a minute. Alright, how's it going, everyone? Oh, I'm off center. Oh no. There we go. Anyways, how's it going? Man, it's been a crazy few days, but I think we're fine. We're fine. Nah, I don't feel like having this voice around. Oh man. Can I just say, work has been very busy recently. Very, very busy. But I survived, and that's all that matters, really, right? And here I am, ready to read for you guys. Oh, I forgot to turn one of my lamps on. My face checking's probably not as good as usual. One moment. Alright. I wonder, while I'm reading, instead of doing my normal voice, should I be doing my more whispery voice? Or would you guys prefer that I speak normally? Kind of like this. So like, the time machine, or the time machine. Something like that. Speaking of the time machine, what chapter were we on? The first one. Oh, thank you very much, Claudia, for the raid. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. We haven't started yet, but we haven't started the reading yet, but we're gonna be doing some reading ASMR here in a moment. I'm just finding the chapter right now. Thank you. I'll get the Hat and Time OST going. While I find that chapter. Hello, everyone from Claudia. What was she doing? What was Claudia up to? Here. Claudia Katsumoto. Reddit readings? Ooh. What kind of Reddit readings? What were you reading from Reddit, I wonder? Anything interesting? Siblings are dating. Uh-oh. What's that first one? Oh, am I the, is that am I the, jerk hole? is that the right subreddit? Oh. Yeah, that. The word that I don't feel like saying because I'm me, and that's just how I roll. Now I don't remember where the chapter was that we left off on. I do browse Reddit a bit though. Just a bit, not too much. I'm of the opinion that browsing too much social media is bad for me. And I came to that realization from experience. I used to use Twitter quite a lot, and then I got really sad, and then I was like, why am I so sad? And then it's like, oh, it's probably because of Twitter. It didn't come to me immediately, but it was like a gradual realization kind of thing. Now let's see here. Um, hmm. I might have to check the VOD. I'm gonna check the VOD real quick to see where we left off at. Cause I cannot find it. Apparently. I thought I had it. I thought I had the right chapter, but I was completely off. Let's see here. Aw, crap. Uh-oh. I'd have to listen to myself. Ah, wait. I found it. Can I? I can. Oh my god, thank you so much, manager. I think I left off on chapter 6. Okay. Yes, I think I finished chapter 5. So we are currently on chapter 6. There we go. Look at me finding it, doing well. Alright. I didn't clear my throat, don't worry. That's not good for you, don't do that. Alright. You said you liked the first one, correct? It may seem odd to you, but it was 2 days before I could follow up on the newfound clue in what was manifestly the proper way. I felt a peculiar shrinking from those pallid bodies. They were just the half-bleached color of the worms and things one sees perceived in spirit in a zoological museum. And they were filthy cold to the touch. Probably my shrinking was largely due to the sympathetic influence of the Eloi, whose disgust of the Morlocks I now began to appreciate. Is that correct? Well, this is what is directly after where I left off on. So I don't know where. It feels like it's missing something. It's not though. The next night, I did not sleep well. Probably my health was a little disordered. I was oppressed with perplexity and doubt. Once or twice, I had a feeling of intense fear for which I could perceive no definitive reason. I remember creeping noisily into the great hall where the little people were sleeping in the moonlight. That night, Weena was among them, and feeling reassured by their presence. It occurred to me that even then, that in the course of a few days the moon must pass through its last quarter, and the nights grow dark when the appearances of these unpleasant creatures from below, these whitened lemurs, this new vermin that had replaced the old, might be more abundant. And on Both these days, I had the restless feeling of one who shirks an inevitable duty. I felt assured that the time machine was only to be recovered by boldly penetrating these underground mysteries. Yet, I could not face the mystery. If only I had a companion, it would have been different. But I was so horribly alone, and even to clamber down into the darkness of the well appalled me. I don't know if you will understand my feeling, but I never felt quite safe at my back. I'm gonna refresh my camera so I'm facing forward. There we go. It was this restlessness, this insecurity perhaps, that drove me further and further afield in my exploring expeditions. Going to the southwestward, toward the rising country that is now called Combwood, I observed far off in the direction of the 19th century Banstead, a vast green structure. Different in character from any I had hitherto seen, it was larger than the largest of the palaces or ruins I knew, and the facade had an oriental look, the face of it having the luster as well as the pale green tint, a kind of bluish green, of a certain type of Chinese porcelain. This difference in aspect suggested a difference in use, and I was minded to push on and explore. But the day was growing late, and I had come upon a sight of the palace after a long and tiring circuit, so I resolved to hold over the adventure for the following day, and I returned to the welcome and the caress of little Weena. But next morning, I perceived clearly enough that my curiosity regarding the palace of green porcelain was a piece of self-deception, to enable me to shirk, and by another day, an experience I dreaded. I resolved I would make the descent without further waste of time, and started out in the early morning toward a well near the ruins of granite and aluminum, or as they say in British English, aluminium. Little Weena ran with me. She danced beside me to the well, but when she saw me lean over the mouth and look downward, she seemed strangely disconcerted. "Goodbye, little Weena," I said, kissing her, and then putting her down, I began to feel over the parapet for the climbing hooks. Rather hastily, I may as well confess, for I feared my courage might leak away. At first she watched me in amazement. Then she gave me a most piteous cry, and running to me, she began to pull at me with her little hands. I think her opposition nerved me rather to proceed. I shook her off, perhaps a little roughly, and in another moment I was in the throat of the well. I saw her agonized face over the parapet, and I smiled to reassure her. Then I had to look down at the unstable hooks to which I clung. I had to clamber down a shaft perhaps 200 yards. The descent was effected by means of metallic bars projecting from the sides of the well, and these being adapted to the needs of the creature much smaller and lighter than myself. I was speedily cramped and fatigued by the descent, and not simply fatigued. One of the bars bent suddenly and under my weight, and almost swung me off into the blackness beneath. For a moment, I hung by one hand, and after that experience, I did not dare to rest again. Though my arms and back were presently acutely painful, I went on clambering down the sheer descent with as quick as a motion as which a star was visible, while little Weena's head showed as a round black projection. The thudding sound of a machine below grew louder and more oppressive. Everything save that little disc above was profoundly dark, and when I looked up again, Weena had disappeared. I was in agony of discomfort. I had some thought of trying to go up the shaft again and leave the underworld alone. But even when I turned this over in my mind, I continued to descend. At last, with intense relief, I saw dimly coming up a foot to the right of me a slender loophole in the wall. Swinging myself in, I found it was the aperture of a narrow horizontal tunnel in which I could lie down and rest. It was not too soon. My arms ached, my back was cramped, and I was trembling with the prolonged terror of a fall. Perhaps this unbroken darkness had a distressing effect upon my eyes. The air was full of the throb and the hum of machinery, pumping air down the shaft. I do not know how long I lay. I was roused by a soft hand touching my face. Starting up in the darkness, I snatched at my matches, and, hastily striking one, I saw 3 stooping white creatures similar to the one I had seen above ground in the ruin, hastily retreating before the light. Living as they did, in what appeared to me impenetrable darkness, their eyes were abnormally large and sensitive, just as are the pupils of the abysmal fishes, and they reflected the light in the same way. I had no doubt they could see me in that rayless obscurity, and they did not seem to have any fear of me apart from the light. But so soon I struck the match in order to see them, they fled incontinently, vanishing into dark gutters and tunnels from which their eyes glared at me in the strangest fashion. I tried to call to them, but the language they had was apparently different from that of the overworld people, so that I was needs left to my own unaided efforts, and the thought of flight before exploration was even then in my mind. But I said to myself, "You are in for it now." And feeling my way along the tunnel, I found the noise of machinery grow louder. Presently, the walls fell away from me, and I came to a large open space, and striking another match, saw that I had entered a vast arched cavern, which stretched into utter darkness beyond the range of my light. The view I had of it was as much as one could see in the burning of a match. Necessarily, my memory is vague. Great shapes, like big machines, grow out of the dimness and cast grotesque black shadows, in which the dim spectral Morlock sheltered from the glare. The place, by the by, was very stuffy and oppressive, and the faint halitus of freshly shed blood was in the air. Some way down the central vista was a large table of white metal, laid with what seemed a meal. The Morlocks at any rate were carnivorous. Even at the time, I remember wondering what large animal could have survived to furnish the red joint I saw. It was all very indistinct, the heavy smell, the unmeaning shapes, the obscene figures laying in the shadows, and only waiting for the darkness to come at me again. Then the match burned down, and stung my fingers, and fell, a ringling red spot in the blackness. I have thought since how particularly ill-equipped I was for such an experience. When I had started the time machine, I had started with the absurd assumption that the men of the future would certainly be infinitely ahead of ourselves in all their appliances. I had come without arms, without medicine, without anything to smoke. At times I had missed tobacco frightfully, even without enough matches. If only I had thought of a kodak, I could have flashed that glimpse of the underworld in a second and examined it at leisure. But as it was, I stood there with only the weapons and the powers that nature had endowed me with: hands, feet, and teeth. These, and 4 safety matches that still remained to me. I was afraid to push my way in among all the machinery in the dark, and it was only with my last glimpse of light that I discovered that my store of matches had run low. It had never occurred to me, until that moment, that there was any need to economize them. And I had wasted almost half the box in astonishing the upper worlders, to whom fire was a novelty. Now, as I say, the arms... I had 4 left, and while I stood in the dark, a hand touched mine. Lank fingers came feeling over my face, and I was sensible of a peculiar, unpleasant odor. I fancied I heard the breathing of the crowd of those dreadful little beings about me. I felt the box of matches in my hand being gently disengaged, and other hands behind me plucking at my clothing. The sense of these unseen creatures examining me was indescribably unpleasant. The sudden realization of my ignorance of their ways of thinking and doing came home to me very vividly in the darkness. I shouted at them as loudly as I could. They started away, and then I could feel them approaching me again. They clutched at me more boldly, whispering odd sounds to each other. I shivered violently and shouted again, rather discordantly. This time they were not so seriously alarmed, and they made a queer laughing noise as they came back at me. I will confess I was horribly frightened. I determined to strike another match and escape under the protection of its glare. I did so, and eking out the flickering with a scrap of paper from my pocket, I made good my retreat to the narrow tunnel, but I had scarce entered this when my light was blown out, and in the blackness I could hear the Morlocks rustling like a wind among leaves, and, pattering in the rain, they hurried after me. In a moment I was clutched by several hands, and there was no mistaking that they were trying to haul me back. I struck another light and waved it in their dazzled faces. I could scarce imagine how nauseatingly inhuman they looked. Those pale, chinless faces and great, lidless, pinkish gray eyes, as they stared in the blindness and bewilderment. But I did not stay to look. I promise you, I retreated again, and when my second match had ended, I struck my third, and it had almost burned through when I reached the opening into the shaft. I laid down on the edge, for the throb of the great pump below me made me giddy. Then I felt sideways for the projecting hooks, and as I did so, my feet were grasped from behind, and I was violently tugged backwards. I lit my last match, and it contentedly went out, but I had my hand on the climbing bar now, and kicking violently, I disengaged myself from the clutches of the Morlocks, and was speedily climbing back up the shaft, while they stayed peering and blinking up at me, all but one little wet wretch, who followed me for some way, and well-nigh secured my boot as a trophy. That climbing seemed interminable to me. With the last 20 or 30 feet of it, deadly nausea came upon me. I had the greatest difficulty in keeping my hold. The last few yards was a frightful struggle against this faintness. Several times my head swam, and I felt all the sensations of falling. At last, however, I got over the well mouth, somehow, and staggered out of the ruin into blinding sunlight. I fell upon my face. Even the soil smelt sweet and clean. Then I remember Weena kissing my hands and ears and the voices of the others among the Eloi. Then, for a time, I was insensible. Well, that was intense. This book is good. I'm really enjoying this. I hope you guys are too. But I'm already losing my voice a little bit. Wow! It's been 30 minutes already. Can you believe that, chat? Can you believe that? It's incredible. How fast time passes when you're reading a good book, huh? I hope you guys are enjoying it. Alright, on to chapter 7. Now, indeed, I seemed in a worse case than before. Hitherto, except during my night's anguish at the loss of the time machine, I had felt a sustaining hope of ultimate escape. But that hope was staggered by these new discoveries. Hitherto, I had merely thought myself impeded by the childish simplicity of the little people, and by some unknown forces which I had only to understand to overcome. But there was an altogether new element in the sickening quality of the Morlocks, a something inhuman and malign. Instinctively, I loathed them. Before, I had felt as a man might feel who had fallen into a pit, my concern with the pit and how to get out of it. Now I felt like a beast in a trap, whose enemy would come upon him soon. The enemy I dreaded may surprise you. It was the darkness of the new moon. Weena had put this into my head by some at first incomprehensible remarks about the dark nights. It was not now such a very difficult problem to guess what the coming dark nights might mean. The moon was on the wane. Each night there was a longer interval of darkness, and I now understood, to some slight degree, at least, the reason of the fear of the little upper world people for the dark. I wondered vaguely at what foul villainy there might be that the Morlocks did under the new moon. I felt pretty sure now that my second hypothesis was all wrong. The upper world people might once have been the favored aristocracy, and the Morlocks their mechanical servants, but that had long since passed away. The two species that had resulted from the evolution of man were sliding down towards, or had already arrived at, an altogether new relationship. The Eloi, like the Carolingian kings, had decayed to a mere beautiful futility. They still possessed the earth on the surface. Since the Morlocks subterranean for innumerable generations had come at last to find the daylit surface intolerable, and the Morlocks made their garments, I inferred, and maintained them in the habitual needs, perhaps through the survival of an old habit of service. They did it as a standing horse paws with his foot, or a man enjoys killing animals in sport. Because ancient and departed necessities have impressed it on the organism. But clearly, The old order was already in part reversed. The nemesis of the delicate ones was creeping on apace. Ages ago, thousands of generations ago, man had thrust his brother man out of the ease and the sunshine, and now that brother was coming back changed. Already, the Eloi had begun to learn one old lesson anew. They were becoming reacquainted with fear. And suddenly, there came into my head the memory of the meat I had seen in the underworld. It seemed odd how it floated into my mind, not stirred up as it were by the current of my meditations, but coming in almost like a question from outside. I tried to recall the form of it. I had a vague sense of something familiar, but I could not tell what it was at the time. Still, however helpless, the little people in the presence of their mysterious fear, I was differently constituted. I came out of this age of ours, this ripe prime of the human race, when fear does not paralyze and mystery has lost its terrors. I at least would defend myself. Without further delay, I determined to make myself arms and fastness where I might sleep. With that refuge as a base, I could face this strange world with some of that confidence I had lost in realizing to what creatures, night by night, I lay exposed. I felt I could never sleep again until my bed was secure from them. I shuddered with horror to think how they must already have examined me. I wandered during the afternoon along the valley of the Thames, but found nothing that commended itself to my mind as inaccessible. All the buildings and the trees seemed easily practicable to such dexterous climbers as the Morlocks. To judge their wills must be. Then the tall pinnacles of the palace of green porcelain and the polished gleam of its walls came back to my memory, and in the evening, taking Weena like a child upon my shoulder, I went up the hills towards the southwest. The distance, I had reckoned, was 7 or 8 miles, but it must have been nearer 18. I had first seen the place on a moist afternoon when the distances are deceptively diminished. In addition, the heel of one of my shoes was loose and a nail was working through the sole. They were comfortable old shoes I wore about indoors, so that I was lame, and it was already long past sunset. I came in sight of the palace, silhouetted back against the pale yellow of the sky. Weena had been hugely delighted when I began to carry her, but after a while she desired me to let her down and ran along by the side of me, occasionally darting off either hand to pick flowers to stick in my pockets. My pockets had always puzzled Weena, but at last she had concluded that they were an eccentric kind of vase for floral decorations. At least, she utilized them for that purpose. And that reminds me, in changing my jacket, I found... The time traveler paused. He put his hands into his pockets and silently placed 2 withered flowers, not unlike very large white marshmallows. Oh, not marshmallows, sorry. White mallows upon the table. Then he resumed his narrative. At the hush of the evening crept over the world, and we proceeded over the hill crest towards Wimbledon. Weena grew tired and wanted to return to the house of grey stone, but I pointed out the distant pinnacles of the palace of green porcelain to her, and contrived to make her understand that we were seeking refuge there from her fear. You know that great pause that comes upon things before dusk? Even the breeze stops in the trees. To me, There is always an air of expectation about that evening's stillness. The sky was clear, remote, and empty save for a few horizontal bars far down in the sunset. Well, that night, the expectation took the color of my fears. In that darkling calm, my senses seemed preternatal. Blah, 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 sorry. Preternaturally. Sorry. Fine. Sharpened. I fancied I could even feel the hollowness of the ground beneath my feet. Could indeed almost see through it. The Morlocks on their anthill going hither and thither and waiting for the dark. In my excitement, I fancied that they would receive my invasion of their burrows as a declaration of war, and why they had taken my time machine. And why had they taken my time machine? One moment my feet fell asleep. I'm so sorry. Oh god. Guys, thank you so much for waiting. I'm so sorry about that. Now, where were we? Ah, yes, okay. So, we went on in the quiet, and the twilight deepened into the night. The clear blue of the distance faded, and one star after another came out. The ground grew dim, and the trees black. Weena's fears and her fatigue grew upon her, and I took her into my arms and talked to her and caressed her. Then, as the darkness grew deeper, my voice is actually going away, I'm sorry. Darkness grew deeper, she put her arms around my neck, and, closing her eyes, tightly pressed her face against my shoulder. So we went down a long slope into a valley, and there, in the dimness, I almost walked into a little river. This I waded, and went up the opposite side of the valley, past a number of sleeping houses, and by a statue, a faun, or some such figure, minus the head. Here, too, were Arcacias. So far, I had seen nothing of the Morlocks, but it was yet early in the night, and the darker hours before the old moon rose were still to come. From the burrow of the hill, I saw a thick... Oh, the next hill, sorry. Oh my gosh, where's my voice? Let me try changing. From the burrow of the next hill, I saw a thick wood spreading wide and black before me. I hesitated at this. I could see no end to it, either to the right or left. Feeling tired, my feet, in particular, were very sore. I carefully lowered Weena from my shoulder as I halted, and sat down upon the turf. I could no longer see the palace of green porcelain, and I was in doubt of my direction. I looked to the thickness of the wood, and thought of what it might hide. Under that dense tangle of branches, one could be out of sight of the stars, even where there were no lurking danger, a danger I did not care to let my imagination loose upon. There would still be the route rocks to stumble over and tree boles to strike against. I was very tired too. After the excitement of the day, I decided that I would not face it, but would pass the night upon the open hill. Weena, I was glad to find, was fast asleep. I carefully wrapped her in my jacket and sat down beside her to wait for the moonrise. The hillside was quiet and deserted, but from the black of the wood there came now and then a stir of living things. Above me shone the stars, for the night was very clear. I felt a certain sense of friendly comfort in their twinkling. All the old constellations had gone from the sky. However, that slow movement, which is imperceptible in 100 human lifetimes, had long since rearranged them in unfamiliar groupings. But the Milky Way, it seemed to me, was still the same tattered streamer of stardust as of yore. Southward, as I judged it, was a very bright red star that was new to me. It was even more splendid than our own green Sirius. And amid all these scintillating points of light, one bright planet shone kindly and steadily like the face of an old friend. Looking at these stars suddenly dwarfed my own troubles and all the gravities of terrestrial life. I thought of their unfathomable distance and the slow inevitable drift of their movements out of the unknown past into the unknown future. I thought of the great precessional cycle that the pole of the earth described. Only 40 times had that silent revolution occurred during all the years that I had traversed. And during these few revolutions, all the activity, all the traditions, the complex organizations, the nations, languages, literatures, aspirations, even the mere memory of the man I knew him, had been swept out of existence. Instead, where these frail creatures who had forgotten their high ancestry and the white things of which I went in terror. Then I thought of the great fear that was between the two species, and for the first time, with a sudden shiver, came the clear knowledge of what the meat I had seen might be. Yet it was too horrible. I looked at little Weena sleeping beside me, her face white and star-like under the stars, and forthwith dismissed the thought. Through that long night I held my mind off the Morlocks as well as I could, and whirled away the time by trying to fancy I could find the signs of the old constellation in the new confusion. The sky kept very clear, except for the hazy cloud or so. No doubt I dozed off at times. Then, as my vision wore on, came a faintness. In the eastward sky, like the reflection of some colorless fire, and the old moon rose, thin and peaked and white. And close behind, and overtaking it, and overflowing it, the dawn came, pale at first, then growing pink and warm. No Morlock had approached us. Indeed, I had seen none upon the hill that night, and, in confidence of renewed day, it almost seemed to me that my fear had been unreasonable. I stood up and found my foot, with the loose heel swollen at the ankle and painful under the heel. So I sat down again, took off my shoes, and flung them away. I awakened Weena, and we went down into the wood, now green and pleasant instead of black and foreboding. We found some fruit, wherewith to break our fast. Funny author. Good one, author. We soon met others of the dainty ones, laughing and dancing in the sunlight, as though there was no such thing in nature as the night. And then I thought once more of the meat I had seen. I felt assured now of what it was, and the bottom of my heart, and from the bottom of my heart, I pitied this last feeble rill from the great flood of humanity. Clearly, at some time in the long ago of human decay, the Morlocks' food had run short. Possibly they had lived on the rats and such like vermin. Even now man is far less discriminating and exclusive in his food than he was, far less than any monkey. His prejudice against human flesh is no deep-seated instinct, and so these inhuman sons of men— I tried to look at the thing in a scientific spirit. After all, they were less human and more remote than our cannibal ancestors of 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, and the intelligence that would have made this state of things a torment had gone. Why should I trouble myself? These Eloi were mere fatted cattle, which the ant-like Morlocks preserved and preyed upon, probably saw to the breeding of, and there was a Weena dancing at my side. Then I tried to preserve myself from the horror that was coming upon me by regarding it as a rigorous punishment of human selfishness. Man had been content to live in ease and delight upon the labors of his fellow man, and had taken necessity as his watchword and excuse, and in the fullness of time, necessity had come home to him. I even tried a Carlyle-like scorn of this wretched aristocracy in decay. But this attitude of mind was impossible. However great their intellectual degradation, the Eloi had kept much of the human form, not to claim my sympathy, and to make me perforce a sharer in their degradation and their fear. I had at that time very vague ideas as to the course I should pursue. My first was to secure some safe place of refuge, and to make myself such arms of metal or stone as I could contrive. That necessity was immediate. The next place I hoped to procure some means of fire, so that I could have the weapon of a torch at hand, for nothing, I knew, would be more efficient against these Morlocks. Then I wanted to arrange some contrivance to break open the doors of bronze under the White Sphinx. I had in mind a battering ram. I had a persuasion that if I could enter those doors and carry a blaze of light before me, I should discover the time machine and escape. I could not imagine the Morlocks were strong enough to move it far away. Weena I had resolved to bring with me to our own time, and turning such schemes over in my mind, I pursued our way towards the building which my fancy had chosen as our dwelling. Okay, we're at chapter 8, but I'm going to take a quick break for a few moments, alright? Just to get my voice back, okay? I'll be right back. Be right back, guys. I'll be right back. Alright? Be right back. Guys, I'm back. Hello. I'm so sorry for leaving you guys all by yourself for so long. I am hungry. I didn't get to eat after I got home from work. I just went straight to this. But my voice seems to be back based on being able to actually speak. So as far as I'm concerned, it was completely worth it. Alright. Let's get through like half of chapter 8 maybe. And then we'll close the stream off. How's that sound? Good? Alright. Chapter 8. I found the palace of green porcelain. When we approached it about noon. I found the palace of green porcelain when we approached about noon, deserted and falling into ruin. Only ragged vestiges of glass remained in its windows, and great sheets of the green facing had fallen away from the corroded metallic framework. It lay very high upon a turfy down, and looking northeastward before I entered it, I was surprised to see a large estuary, or even creek, where I judged Wandsworth and Betsersea must have once been. I thought then, though I never followed up on the thought, of what might have happened, or might be happening, to living things in the sea. The material of the palace proved on examination to be indeed porcelain, and along the face of it I saw an inscription of some unknown character. I thought, rather foolishly, that Weena might help me to interpret this, but I only learned that the bare idea of writing had never entered her head. She always seemed to me, I fancy, more human than she was, perhaps because of her affection. Her affection was so human. Within the big valves of the door, which were open and broken, we found, instead of a customary hall, a long gallery lit by many side windows. At first glance, I was reminded of a museum. The tiled floor was thick with dust, and a remarkable array of miscellaneous objects was shrouded in the same gray covering. Then I perceived, standing strange and gaunt in the center of the hall, what was clearly the lower part of a huge skeleton. I recognized by the oblique feet that it was some extinct creature after the fashion of the megatherium. The skull and the upper bones lay beside it in the thick dust, and in one place, where rainwater had dropped through a leak in the roof, the thing itself had been worn away. Further in the gallery was a huge skeleton barrel of a brontosaurus. My museum hypothesis was confirmed. Going toward the side, I found what appeared to be sloping shelves. In clearing away the thick dust, I found the old familiar glass cases of our own time, but they must have been airtight to judge from the fair preservation of some of their contents. Clearly, we stood among the ruins of some latter-day South Kensington. South Kensington. Here, apparently, was the paleontological section. Paleontological section, and a very splendid array of fossils it must have been. though the inevitable process of decay that has been staved off for a time and had, through the extinction of bacteria and fungi, lost 99 hundredths of its force, was nevertheless, with extreme sureness, with extreme slowness at work, again upon all of its treasures. Here and there I found traces of little people in the shape of rare fossils broken to pieces, or threaded in strings upon the reeds, and the cases had been, in some instances, boldly removed by the Morlocks as I judged. The place was very silent. The thick dust deadened our footsteps. Weena, who had been rolling a sea urchin down the sloping glass of a case, presently came as I stared about me, and very quietly took my hand and stood beside me. At first I was so much surprised by this ancient monument of an intellectual age that I gave no thought to the possibilities it presented. Even my preoccupation about the time machine receded a little from my mind. To judge for the size of this place, the Palace of Green Porcelain had a great deal more in it than a gallery of paleontology, possibly historical galleries. It might have been even a library to me, at least in my present circumstances. These would be vastly more interesting than the spectacle of old-time geology and decay. Exploring, I found another short gallery running transversely to the first. This appeared to be devoted to minerals. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Where was I? And the sight of a block of sulfur set my mind running on gunpowder. But I could not find no saltpeter. Indeed, no nitrates of any kind. Doubtless they had deliquesced ages ago, yet the sulfur hung in my mind and set up a train of thinking. As for the rest of the contents of that gallery, through the whole they were the best preserved of all I saw. I had little interest. I am no specialist in mineralogy, and I went down on a very ruinous aisle running parallel to the first hall I entered. Apparently this section had been devoted to natural history, but everything had long since passed out of recognition. Very convenient, author. A few shriveled and blackened vestiges of what had once been stuffed animals, desiccated mummies in jars that had once been held spirit, a brown dust of departed plants. That was all. I was sorry for that, because I should have been glad to trace the patient readjustments by which the conquest of animated nature had been attained. Then we came to a gallery of simply colossal proportions, but singularly ill-lit, the floor of it running downward at a slight angle from the end at which I entered. At intervals, white globes hung from the ceiling, many of them cracked and smashed, which suggested that originally the place had been artificially lit. Here I was more in my element, for rising on either side of me were huge bulks of big machines, all greatly corroded and many broken down, but some still fairly complete. You know, I have a certain weakness for the mechanism, and I was inclined to linger among these, the more so as for the most part they had the interest of puzzles, and I could make only the vaguest guesses at what they were for. I fancied that if I could solve their puzzles, I should find myself in possession of powers that might be of use against the Morlocks. Suddenly, Weena came very close to my side, so suddenly that she startled me. Had it not been for her, I do not think I would have noticed that the floor of the gallery sloped at all. Footnote: it may be, of course, that the floor did not slope, but the museum was built into the side of a hill. ED. Is that editor's note? What? Okay. The end I had come in at was quite above ground, and was lit by rare slit-like windows. As you went down the length, the ground came up against these windows, until at last there was a pit like the area of a London house before each, and only a narrow line of daylight at the top. I went slowly along, puzzling about the machines and lights until Weena's increasing apprehensions drew my attention. Then I saw that the gallery ran down at last into a thick darkness. I hesitated, and then, as I looked around me, I saw that the dust was less abundant and its surface even less. Further away, towards the dimness, it appeared to be broken by a number of small, narrow footprints. My sense of the immediate presence in the Morlocks revived at that, and I felt that I was wasting my time in the academic examination of machinery. I called to mind that it was already far advanced in the afternoon, and that I had still no weapon, no refuge, and no means of making a fire. And then, down in a remote blackness of the gallery, I heard a peculiar pattering, and the same odd noises I had down in the well. I took Weena's hand, then, struck with a sudden idea, I left her and turned towards a machine which projected a lever not unlike those in a signal box. Clambering upon the stand and grasping this lever in my hands, I pulled my weight upon it sideways. Suddenly, Weena deserted the central aisle and began to whimper. I had judged the strength of the lever pretty correctly, for it snapped after a minute's strain, and I rejoined her with a mace in my hand, more than sufficient, I judged, for any Morlock skull I might encounter. And I longed very much to kill a Morlock or so. Very inhuman, you may think, to want to go killing one's own descendants, but it was impossible, somehow, to feel any humanity in the things, only my disinclination to leave Weena, and a persuasion that if I began to slake my thirst for murder, my time machine might suffer, restrained me from going straight down to the gallery and killing the brutes I heard. Jeez. Violent. Well, mace in one hand and Weena in the other, I went out of that gallery and into another, and still larger one, and into another and still larger one, which at the first glance reminded me of a military chapel hung with tattered flags. The brown and charred rags that hung from the sides of it I presently recognized as the decaying vestiges of books. They had long since dropped to pieces, and every semblance of print had left them. But here and there were warped boards and cracked metallic clasps that told the tale well enough. I had been a literary man, I might, perhaps, have moralized upon the futility of all ambition. But as it was, the thing that struck me with the keenest force was the enormous waste of labor to which the somber wilderness of rotting paper testified. At the time, I will confess that I thought chiefly the philosophical transactions in my own 17 papers upon physical optics. Then, going up a broad staircase, we came to what may once have been a gallery of technical chemistry, and here I had not a little hope of useful discoveries, except at one end where the roof had collapsed. This gallery was well preserved. I went eagerly to every unbroken case, and at last, in one of the really airtight cases, I found a box of matches. Very eagerly I tried them. They were perfectly good. They were not even damp. I turned to Weena. "Dance!" I cried to her in her own tongue, for now I had a weapon indeed against these horrible creatures we feared. And so, in that derelict museum, upon the thick carpeting of dust, to Weena's huge delight, I solemnly performed a kind of composite dance, whistling the land of the Lail as cheerfully as I could. In part, it was a modest cancan, in part a step dance, in part a skirt dance, so far my tailcoat permitted, and in part original, for I am naturally inventive, as you know. All right, I think we're gonna go ahead and end it there, because my food is calling towards me, you know. I'm very hungry. So, we're gonna see who I can send you guys towards. Oh, yes, of course. Of course, we have, Well, I thought we had someone to send you towards. But I guess we don't. I guess I don't have anyone to send you guys to. I thought I did. I'm sorry. Maybe I can find another. Maybe I can find another. Wow. Twitch got rid of the low to high viewers feature? I use that a lot to find lower viewers. Streamers, are you kidding me? I guess I won't send you guys to anyone because I didn't find anyone beforehand. That's really awful. I'm so sorry. Let's see. Maybe I can use the VTuber tag. That's a little better. You know what? I'll just end it here. Yeah, I don't have it. Kudo, I don't have it. I'll see you guys. Friday? Correct. Yeah, Friday for something, alright? See you guys then, okay? Bye-bye.